Welcome to this edition of Healthy Living. I'm your host, Tim Kelly, joined today by Jim Stile, who's the coordinator of the Western Tidewater Medical Reserve Corps. And Jim, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, before we get into the Western Tidewater version of the Medical Reserve Corps, tell us what a Medical Reserve Corps actually is. What service and function does it serve a community?
Well, there are about 1,200 Medical Reserve Corps units across the nation. They became active starting after the 9/11 events, when President Bush asked the different secretaries to come up with a plan where they could have pre-credentialed, pre-qualified medical and non-medical volunteers in the local community to respond to disasters and initiatives of all kinds. The Center for Disease Control and Surgeon General was tasked through Homeland Security Department to come up with a plan, and they came up with the Medical Reserve Corps. From there, it expanded. Virginia was one of the first few states to do that, and we were the 64th unit in the state to become active. That happened in September of 2003.
Okay. Now, of course, when I introduced you, I mentioned Western Tidewater, so let's talk about the area that you cover with your organization.
Okay, we are what's considered a rural frontier community.
Okay.
Kind of takes you back to the Old West days. But we are a community that serves all of Southampton County, all of Isle of Wight County, the city of Suffolk, and the town of Franklin. We are part of the Eastern region, which are 8 other health departments with approximately 1.7 million people in those jurisdictions. The 8 coordinators and myself meet on a monthly basis with the state coordinator and the other 31 units that are across the Commonwealth to resolve issues, to work on initiatives, and basically catch up on what we're doing and share best practices and lessons learned.
Now, I know one thing certainly that your organization or the Medical Reserve Corps thrives on is, of course, volunteers.
Yes.
If you could talk about the makeup of the folks that you currently have working with you, and also, and maybe some of the roles they play, because I think you said something very key early on, both medical and non-medical. So there's maybe a bit of a misnomer with the title of the group to say that you really don't have to have a medical background to be a key part in what you guys are trying to achieve, correct?
Correct. Tim, you're absolutely on course. Part of the Medical Reserve Corps is that medical professional, healthcare licensed, credentialed individual. But they're not all. There is a great need and a justifiable need for people that don't have medical backgrounds. We train, we qualify, we do credentialing in CPR, AED, first aid, and things like that for non-medical volunteers. But the non-medical volunteers, and I'm one of those volunteers, I don't have a medical background, but I've got the qualifications that allow me to support and assist medical initiatives and medical response within our community. We have volunteers who are apartment managers, health food care workers in schools, teachers. We have semi-drivers, and a whole host of other people from the community. Where we use those non-medical volunteers, for instance, if we had to set up a shot clinic in all 4 localities at 8 different locations, I don't have the staff to do that. So a non-medical volunteer, when properly trained, can set up that clinic and do absolutely everything up to the point where they have to give the vaccination.
Right.
That's when that medical person comes in, and that's where that medical person qualification, credentialing is most important. When you combine the non-medical or the general support volunteer and the medical component volunteer together, you've got an unbeatable team that you can use in every aspect throughout your community.
What are some of the applications where the Reserve Corps will kind of jump into play there? And of course, obviously we might think of a natural disaster where that would come into play, but also non-emergency situations where you talked about giving vaccines. And I think we talked again off camera before we started. The Tour de Cure was a recent event that y'all were involved in. Just talk about some of these things that the Medical Reserve Corps participates in and really plays a key role here in the community.
Okay, well, let me backstep just a minute.
That's fine.
Part of building community resilience is training, preparedness, education, community outreach.
Right.
Those all come together for risk mitigation and risk eliminations. If we get important messages to you or other community members and we never have to engage you in a disaster, our job was done.
Right.
Because you were trained, you knew that you had to have a survival kit, you knew what you had to have in that survival kit.
Right.
You understood that for the first 72 hours, you were basically on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Us as a local community, each community is anticipated or expected to be on their own for 72 hours. And realistically, we're looking at 96 hours
Right.
Before federal or out-of-state or interstate aid can get to us. Coming back to that rural frontier part here, this is what's really important, and it's critical about Western Tidewater.
Right.
If you look at all the hurricane evacuation maps, and if you look at the choke points, bridges, roads, tunnels, and all the things in the greater Hampton Roads area,
Mm-hmm.
we are one of those localities that people have got to go through to evacuate the inner area, but they also have to come through to support sustainment for those inner area cities. So we're a critical path road, crossroads here. Highway 10, 460, 58, and then you've got Interstate 64.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 3 of the 4 ingress-egress routes, and our volunteers realize through situational awareness that even though we've got those roads, sometimes they're not passable because of flooding and downed trees and things like that.
Right.
So we train, we equip, we prepare our volunteers to be survivors. We're not preppers in the sense that you would watch something on A&E and such like that. I don't have people digging holes in their backyard.
Right.
But through the training, the equipping, and preparation of our volunteers, and taking that message in community outreach, either through our partners, through faith-based organizations, through the emergency planner committees and such in the 4 localities, we get that information, we get that education, and all the components brought together at the individual level so that the individual citizen is a stronger individual survivor. Once that person has those survivor skills, the information they need to do what they need to do during a time of disaster, they then can respond quicker and we can recover faster. So it's really about preparedness, and that's where we start all of our things, at the preparedness level.
Now, if someone comes to you and says, Jim, I'd like to volunteer, what is the process and what training opportunities are they afforded to certainly get the knowledge that they can go out there and be a player with the Reserve Corps?
Well, we have an online registration application through the Virginia Volunteer Health System, VVHS. Anybody with a computer access can Google Virginia MRC, or you can just Google MRC and you can follow the links and apps that bring you down to that. Now, that's where it gets tricky. Most of the people who live in our district don't live in Western Tidewater. They live in Sedley, they live in Cortland, they live in Boykins or Carrollton, but they don't live in Western Tidewater. In the volunteer system, the units are listed by their health district. So you will see Norfolk, Chesapeake, Virginia Beach, and may think that that's the closest locality for someone in Smithfield, or again in Boykins or Capron. So you have to do a little bit of research there to figure out really where your best area is.
Sure.
Through the different coordinators, we work real well to make sure that we get the volunteer to the right locality, and that's essential because if something happens and you're in your house, you're not going to be able to get to Hampton across the James River Bridge or to Monitor Merrimack or through the Steel Bridge and then through the Hampton Roads Tunnel. So we really want the local volunteer to be a local community asset, trained, equipped, and working with the people in that community so that we build that esprit de corps, that camaraderie, and we really work towards teamwork so that we know each other's capabilities. My belief and our practice is that if you train that way, you'll respond that way. And the better responders we are, and let me clarify, we are not first responders.
Correct.
I don't have any sirens or lights on my car, and I don't have any special privileges that allow me to go fast on the highway. But as Medical Reserve Corps responders, we work with our community partners, our law enforcement, our fire, emergency, and all the emergency planners and the local county administrators to know what those capabilities are that we bring to the fight. And it may be a natural disaster event. It may be anything from a train derailment where you have chemicals leaking into a town and we have to set up a shelter. Our Medical Reserve Corps volunteers are responsible for the medical component of that shelter. There's 8 shelters across our district, and we may open a shelter in our district not because of something that happened in Western Tidewater, but because something happened in Norfolk or in New Orleans, as in Katrina. We are the area that they would bring evacuees to, because this is the best place for them.
Got it.
So there's a lot of different things that come into this. It isn't an easy answer, and that's why working with our partnering organizations and building those strong partnerships is such an essential task.
Now, what types of training do you afford the volunteers who are part of your organization? And once they're screened and brought into the process, certainly everybody comes with their own set of pre-skills, so to speak.
Yes.
But obviously there are more skills they need to take on to be able to respond and handle the situation you've talked about. How does that process work?
Well, we're what they call a NIMS organization, a National Incident Management System organization. So we comply with FEMA standards for training, certification, readiness, and such. There are about 4 basic courses that I want all the volunteers to perform. One is an IS-22. It's a FEMA course. It's online for anybody. It's called Are You Ready? And it basically prepares an individual or a family to survive that first 72 to 96 hours. It takes you through what a disaster is, how to prepare for the different disasters. And we take an all hazards approach, because if you can, and I have to chuckle here, you've probably heard about the zombie apocalypse. If you can survive that zombie apocalypse, you can survive a flood in Franklin. You can survive a tornado in Driver and Suffolk. But it's all about preparedness, readiness, and education. Most of the people have things in their house, but they don't have things all together. So if you had to evacuate and you had to grab your kit, you don't have everything in one place. So that part of the preparedness is important, and you get that from that Are You Ready course.
Sure.
We also do the Incident Command System, ICS 100, and that's how all of our community partners work together. And it's important because when a volunteer reports or deploys for an assignment, they're not working for me as the coordinator. I may be working for that volunteer because they're the more qualified, credentialed person. So your day job doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be the lead or the person in charge during an event or a disaster. You fall into an existing organization under an ICS structure, and then you respond accordingly there. That part teaches our volunteers the familiarization so that they do understand where they fit in the big picture. There's 2 other courses. There's an ICS or an IS 700, which is the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, and that tells us how this whole process came together. And it's really it's a good story in that some of these things go back to the 1970s in California with the Fire Corps, and how integration and interoperability failed there. And because it failed, communities lost resources and they lost lots of lives. It's sad that we learn from disasters, but if we don't learn and we don't improve, we don't build communities, and our resiliency doesn't improve over time. So this training, this education, exercises, demonstrations, community outreach, all the things that come with it. And you mentioned the Tour de Cure. Tour de Cure, we had 11 volunteers at 8 rest stops across all of Suffolk. Those volunteers were CPR, AED qualified, first aid qualified. We had student nurses, we had pharmacists, we had people like me, non-medical. I was working for an RN who works at OBC in the emergency department. But we had volunteers throughout the community. We had an ODU student who wants to be a doctor, and he was one of the people there. So my job is to marry those persons up with the best capabilities to support the requirements of the organization that we're supporting, and then make sure that the training, qualification, and credentialing is in place to get that person out and be a available asset. Now, that said, I didn't take very good care of myself that day because I've got a little bit of a suntan going on today. But it really is about education and preparation at the individual level.
What, in your opinion, makes a good volunteer or a good candidate to be a member of the Medical Reserve Corps?
That's a good question, and it's something I talk to every volunteer about. You have passions in your life. I have passions. they're not necessarily the same. I have one volunteer that if we're going to do something with diabetes, I know that volunteer will be the first one to call me.
Right.
I have other volunteers that I know if we're going to put together tick kits or if we're going to pre-position packages to hand out at the Peanut Festival or the Isle of Wight County Fair or the Southampton Franklin County Fair. These are things that the people can do at their homes. They bring people together from their community. We've had tremendous response. A lady came this morning, dropped 400 tick awareness kits off, and took another 400. So that one volunteer, although she can't come to all the training, she can't come to some of the events, she is still an active, participating, important member of our community because she's doing something that's going to have a return in investment later on down the road. Volunteerism is a great thing, but sometimes life gets in the way of allowing us to do what we'd like to do.
Sure.
So I understand that, and I work with each volunteer to identify their passions. And once we identify their passions, we work to bring that person to a level of qualification and readiness. And some of them go into a leadership position and they become the person responsible for that. And we've had really good luck with that. And it's really all about empowering the volunteers.
Right.
I'm one person. We have 100 volunteers. I would much rather have 100 people out there working than one person trying to do it all. And the volunteers are really where the credit goes. And it's very fortuitous that this week is the chosen date for this interview because it's National Volunteer Appreciation Week. So
we timed it perfectly.
Yes, I thank you for this opportunity
Sure.
to acknowledge their contributions, each and every one of them.
Now, if someone's watching this program and they go, okay, Jim, you got me all fired up. I want to find out how I can participate, how I can become a volunteer. How can they reach you, or what is maybe the first steps they need to take? I know you mentioned the website a little earlier, but talk about what that is and really mainly how they can get in touch with you to maybe get more information.
Okay. Any volunteer, potential volunteer, can call me. My phone number is 757-514-4768. My cell phone number is 757-719-1443. I'd give you my email, but it's very hard to pronounce all of it.
That's
but
fine.
I'll provide that to you, and hopefully you can make a slide that'll show.
We'll do that.
Call me if you've got questions. I can get you with another local volunteer in your area, and it may be someone that you know. We had a recent event where we brought some volunteers together to build first aid kits. And what I did was, as each volunteer reported in, they had to be introduced by the last person.
Right.
And what I found was there was a lot of people who knew each other from previous, anything back to high school, and me, that's a long time ago. But really what we did was we reestablished some of those old acquaintances, we made new acquaintances, and we brought our team up. You could see it just evolve that day. Any volunteer can call me to talk to me. I give them my home phone numbers and tell them I'm awake till 11:30. And even after that, if they really need to talk to me. But we have on that VVHS site, there is a process that we go through where the individual puts their credentials and such.
Right.
Then we go through an accrediting process where I check licensure, I check their credentials, and then I make a meeting with them. We do an orientation. It takes about 2 hours. We take a photo, we do a background investigation, and we process that person to get them to that point for training.
Well, Jim, thanks for being with us today and sharing the information about the Western Tidewater Medical Reserve Corps. But before we go, I want to give you one more chance to give out a plug, if you will, for people that are maybe thinking about it, just a way to maybe encourage them to maybe make that first step, contact you, get started with the application process to get involved. Any thoughts on that topic?
Well, I'll tell you this. We are a volunteer-oriented organization. However, we're not your traditional volunteer organization. When you decide to become involved with us, you make a commitment not only to yourself, but to your community. That commitment has paybacks to you individually and to the community as a whole. It's really about when you want to make that decision. Don't wait, because I don't know what that next crisis du jour is going to be. It's really about having everything in place so that we can respond when we're needed,
Right.
as fast as we can, and have people and assets available to take care of our community. So I do thank you, and I enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you today, and I do hope that that people take this message and apply it. And even if you don't join us as volunteers, get out in your community, get involved, and be proactive about building your communities.
Again,
Thanks, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. That will do it for this edition of Healthy Living, and as always, we leave you to your health.